Ricky, you're the embodiment of country's unbroken circle.
When Nashville was at its loudest, packed to the rafters with neon lights and record contracts, a handful of chart toppers quietly picked up their guitars, whispered a prayer, and walked away from the roar. They traded sold-out arenas for pews, roadies for revival choirs, and raw fame for something they insisted was far louder inside, a steady, unmistakable voice calling them home. Take Ricky Skaggs, a prodigy who could make a mandolin sound like high-voltage wire. In the 80s, he was the golden boy who dragged bluegrass back onto mainstream radio, racking up Grammys and headlining sold-out tours. Yet during a backstage lull in 1997, he scribbled a single line in his notebook. "I'm playing the right notes for the wrong reasons." Friends thought it was a lyric. It was actually a resignation letter. Within months, he canceled an international leg, swapped tailored jackets for faded denim, and re-emerged in tiny mountain churches, finally convinced that the only stage that mattered was the one built on faith. Critics claimed he ruined a lucrative run. He claims he finally heard himself think. Connie Smith's turning point felt less cinematic, but was every bit as decisive. She was America's sweetheart in 1964 when, Once a Day, spent 8 straight weeks perched at #1, a feat no other female country singer has topped. Management plotted cross-country tours that would keep her gone for months, yet each time the bus engine rumbled awake, she felt an ache in her chest. After one Christmas week performance, she hurried to the dressing room, dialed home, and heard her daughter ask, "Will Santa find us if Mom stays on stage?" That single sentence cut deeper than any critic's barb. Within a year, she traded arenas for living rooms, promising that if she ever sang again, it would be in service of the message that mattered most. When she finally returned in the late 70s, it was with gospel albums so intimate they felt like journal entries set to steel guitar. Barbara Mandrell's detour began not in a sanctuary, but on a lonely stretch of highway in 1984, when her Jaguar collided head-on with a drunk driver. Doctors warned she might never perform again, and during those excruciating months of therapy, she claims she felt God nudge her away from the glitter. When she did step back beneath the spotlights, everything looked different. The glitzy stage costumes were replaced by tasteful gowns, and the set list leaned heavily on songs of gratitude. Her hits still topped the charts, but she quietly funneled much of the profit into charities that built churches and funded rehabilitation centers, telling friends that the wreck had rearranged her idea of success. By 1997, she retired altogether, stepping away at the height of her earning power because, as she later quipped, "There's no encore bigger than obedience." Doyle Lawson grew up harmonizing in tobacco barns, but the real conversion happened on a tour bus barreling through Georgia at 3 in the morning. A fellow picker handed him a pocket Bible and dared him to read a chapter before the next exit. What began as a joke became a ritual, and by the end of the tour, Lawson felt a conviction he couldn't shake. He dissolved his existing contract, reformed Quicksilver as an all-gospel group, and hit the road again, this time playing revival tents and rural sanctuaries that paid in potluck dinners instead of royalties. Industry insiders warned that he would vanish without the big radio machine behind him. Yet his new records quietly outsold the old ones, and bluegrass festivals started scheduling Sunday morning services just to hear him preach between mandolin solos. Tennessee Ernie Ford's pivot still ranks among the most shocking in country history. In 1957, he walked into Capitol Records and announced that his next album would be a collection of hymns, a commercial gamble his label likened to career self-sabotage. The gamble paid off. The record moved millions, and Ford spent the rest of his life baptizing primetime television audiences with booming bass renditions of Amazing Grace. Hollywood attempted to lure him back into variety shows heavy on comedy sketches, but he insisted on including at least one spiritual each episode. When executives pushed back, he shrugged and said, "The song saved me. They'll save the ratings too." He was right, and network suits learned that a verse of scripture delivered in a baritone drawl could boost viewership better than any canned laugh track. Some exits happened so quietly the tabloids missed them entirely. Sonny James, once nicknamed the Southern Gentleman, simply slipped off the tour circuit after his 57th charting single and headed back to Alabama. There he taught Sunday school, mowed the church lawn, and occasionally agreed to play a local fair if the promoter allowed him to close with a hymn. Unlike others, James never announced a retirement or rebirth. He just lived it. Years later, when reporters tracked him down, they found an unassuming man repairing hymnals in a back pew. Asked why he abandoned the spotlight, he smiled and said, "It was never my light to begin with." Jan Howard's story is etched with grief. The loss of two sons, one in combat and another by his own tragic choice, left her spiraling. Desperate for meaning, she began attending late-night prayer meetings, sitting in the back with dark glasses to hide swollen eyes. Slowly, the music inside her changed keys. The barroom ballads gave way to tender laments about reunion and redemption, the kind of songs that left curtains of silence hanging over an audience. Critics called the new material too heavy for radio, yet concertgoers queued for hours to hear her sing what they were too scared to say out loud, that broken hearts might still beat in rhythm with hope. Marty Stewart, flashy rhinestone suits and all, charts a different map. He never vanished from television. Instead, he turned every appearance into a covert revival meeting. Behind the scenes, he lobbied networks to feature forgotten gospel standards, arguing that heritage mattered more than algorithms. When streaming executives pushed for trendier content, Stewart countered by inviting elderly gospel quartets onto his show, watching viewership spike as millennials discovered harmonies older than their grandparents. He jokes that he is smuggling truth through a Telecaster, but insiders know he's dead serious. Ask him why he stays in Nashville and he'll say, "Someone has to guard the fire." Billy Walker's testimony starts with a near miss. He was driving overnight between gigs when his bus veered off a rain-slick curve, killing several bandmates and leaving him with survivor's guilt so heavy he considered quitting music altogether. In the hush of hospital corridors, he claims he heard a divine promise that his voice had a new assignment. From then on, Walker played mostly churches, finishing each concert with an altar invitation. He saw fewer spotlights but more changed faces, and he swore that the smell of potluck casseroles backstage beat any velvet rope after-party he had ever attended. Margot Smith, famous for yodel-tinged top tens, reinvented herself alongside her daughter, Holly. They toured modest auditoriums that smelled like coffee and hymn books, selling CDs from a folding table and praying with fans who lingered. Observers expecting mother-daughter gimmicks were surprised by luminous harmonies and candid testimonies about family forgiveness. Smith says the stripped-down settings exposed every musical flaw and every ounce of sincerity. Audience counts shrank, but letters of thanks multiplied, and that, she insists, is a math she can live with. Red Sovine's gravelly storytelling once celebrated asphalt legends in CB slang, but in later years, he steered those 18-wheeler tales toward heavenly destinations. Truck stop jukeboxes still spun Phantom 309, yet concert staples gradually included testimonies about a different kind of road. Legend claims that at one late-night diner, a young driver thanked Savine for a song that helped him stay awake and avoid a deadly crash. The singer replied, "Son, the credit belongs upstairs," then left enough money at the register to cover every slice of pie ordered until sunrise. Larry Gatlin understands how fast applause can morph into addiction. Pumped up on pills during the Gatlin Brothers arena era, he once walked on stage convinced the reverb was whispering his name. Rehab removed the chemicals but not the craving, so he checked himself into a desert retreat where the daily schedule alternated between prayer, counseling, and hard manual labor. When he emerged, he wrote, "All the gold in California anew in his heart, convinced the real gold was mercy." Today, he hosts radio segments dissecting country lyrics through a theological lens and jokes that sobriety is the best high he's ever chased. Jimmy Fortune left the safety net of the Statler brothers with nothing but an acoustic guitar and a stack of unwritten songs. The first months were brutal. Empty gas tank, empty calendar, empty wallet. One night, parked behind a rural church, he practiced scales to stave off panic until the custodian invited him to sleep in the fellowship hall. That unexpected kindness shaped his next album, which overflows with ballads about strangers who become family the instant grace enters the room. Nowadays, he ends concerts by praying for whatever hometown will host him next, certain that generosity comes full circle. Lulu Roman's laugh once carried hee-haw, but off-camera she battled the dark spiral of addiction that nearly ended her career and her life. Her pivot arrived in the sterile chill of a rehab clinic where a volunteer choir visited on Sunday afternoons. Something in those off-key harmonies broke her open. After recovery, she returned to the same variety show, insisting on inserting a gospel number each season. Ratings held steady, but letters from viewers wrestling with their own demons poured in, convincing producers that testimony could be good television. Tommy Overstreet, whose smooth baritone once smoldered through love songs, opted for a quieter ember later in life. He purchased a small ranch, hosted weekend retreats for veterans, and closed each campfire jam with hymns strummed under the Texas stars. Overstreet claimed the open sky provided better acoustics than any auditorium, and the honesty of vets singing off-key beat the roar of a stadium crowd. Ferlin Husky flirted with mortality so often that doctors kept a chart ready. Heart surgery in the 80s forced him to confront the thin line between curtain calls and funerals. He vowed that if he recovered, he would finish every concert with "Wings of a Dove." True to form, he lived longer than predictions and sang the old hymn so many times that fans joked it should be printed on his headstone. After shows, he stayed late to pray with strangers, unbothered that the janitorial crew vacuumed around him. Roy Acuff, the king of country music, wielded his influence like a benevolent scepter. He cornered Opry executives in smoky hallways and insisted that Sunday afternoon slots remain reserved for gospel quartets, reminding them that the show's original charter pledged to uplift. Younger artists feared crossing him, not because he was cruel, but because his conviction made excuses sound silly. Stories circulate of Acuff pacing backstage, urging nervous rookies to steady themselves by humming a hymn. Many later confessed that the quick prayer he spoke over them mattered more than their first paycheck. Wanda Jackson's transformation from rockabilly rebel to gospel matriarch shocked critics who adored her growl. After a tent revival altar call in 1977, she donated her sequined stage wardrobe to a charity shop and showed up next Sunday wearing modest cotton and a grin. She worried fans would miss the swagger, but record sales suggested the raw honesty only amplified her edge. Jackson says the toughest part wasn't switching genres, it was declining lucrative Vegas offers that required late-night sets in cigarette haze. Turning them down cost her 6 figures, but she claims the peace that followed was priceless. Hank Snow spent years singing about mythical voyages, but age taught him that some journeys happen in place. Increasingly housebound, he turned his mansion into a kind of open-door mission, inviting struggling musicians to crash in spare rooms and raid his pantry. Neighbors grumbled about guitars ringing at all hours, yet Snow loved the chaos, telling reporters, "The house is big, grace is bigger." When he did venture out, it was often to nearby prisons where he played stripped-down sets and reminded inmates that shackles can't shackle the soul. Johnny Cash's redemption arc is so mythic it risks cliché, yet the details still stun. After years of chemical self-destruction in dingy motels, he staggered into Nickajack Cave intending never to emerge. In the suffocating darkness, he claims to have heard a whisper, "Live." That whisper chased him back to daylight, then to a small church where he collapsed at the altar. From that moment, every black suit he wore felt less like rebellion and more like uniform, a daily reminder to mourn what might have been and celebrate what still could be. He carried that duality onto prison stages, singing warnings laced with mercy, proving that the same voice that once growled threats could also pray. Across these 20 stories, you'll find different melodies, but the same refrain: identity is louder than industry. Each artist realized the machine they had helped build would happily grind them down for one more radio hit, yet true success required a quieter stage. Their departures weren't about rejecting music. They were about reclaiming authorship over its purpose. They rewrote charts with verses of testimony, trading 3-minute singles for eternal choruses. Some lost fortunes, others lost fame, but none lost the spark that first drew them to a microphone, a spark they now see as divine fire. Ironically, their perceived withdrawals enriched country music rather than impoverished it. When Ricky Skaggs took gospel to mainstream festivals, bluegrass picked up a new generation of listeners. When Barbara Mandrell spoke about faith on talk shows, she opened lanes for contemporary Christian crossover. Every exit created vacuum, and into that space poured fresh creativity from artists who realized they, too, could be honest without tanking their careers. The ripple effect still spreads. You can trace modern, worship-infused country hits back to these pioneers who risked turning down the volume in order to tune their hearts. Critics paint their choices as quaint, but make no mistake, there is rebellion here. To abandon easy money for uncertain ministry is to declare that spreadsheets don't dictate worth. It's a fist raised against the notion that art exists solely for profit. Every time Larry Gatlin steps to a pulpit instead of an arena, he shouts that healing outranks headlines. Every time Wanda Jackson turns down a Vegas residency, she announces that integrity trumps encore-driven euphoria. Such decisions carve deep grooves in cultural vinyl, etching out paths for anyone tired of dancing to someone else's spin. So what does this choir of renegades sing to you and me? It's more than nostalgia, it's invitation. If fame, followers, or even a comfortable routine have started ringing hollow, their stories prove course corrections are not only possible but powerful. Ricky Skaggs would tell you that strings still ring after you change venues. Johnny Cash would tell you that darkness can become doorway. And Connie Smith would remind you that sometimes the bravest stage is the kitchen floor, where lullabies double as prayers. Remember, none of these artists planned a publicity stunt. Most slipped away quietly, trusting that authenticity would generate its own echo. The media eventually found them, yes, but by then the narrative belonged to them, not to a marketing department. Their lives became living liner notes that said, in effect, "This is how you riff on redemption." Next time a chart-topping single crackles through your speakers, picture the singer alone backstage, wondering if the roar will ever fill the silence that descends when the crowd files out. Then picture a simpler scene, one of our 20 travel-worn legends tuning up in a modest church, the only spotlight a stained glass sunrise. Which setting sounds louder now? Maybe the real stage has nothing to do with size and everything to do with surrender. The encore, after all, is not applause but peace, and that is a note worth holding forever. If these stories resonate, let them push you to tune your own life. Turn down the noise long enough to hear the whisper underneath, because that quiet invitation could be the first chord of the song you were always meant to sing.